So can I just now introduce Liz Ruck from Mental Health Australia and Tina Smith from the Mental Health Coordinating Council of New South Wales. Tina's running a project which has been referred to a couple of times up in the Hunter. She is, I think, doing an amazing job. I mean, treading a very careful line between generating the learnings that the agency needs to make, while also making sure that people with the lived experience of mental illness, families, carers and services get voice in the trial site, and she's doing an amazing job at that, and it's fantastic. Liz, I only just met the other day from Mental Health Australia at National Peak, and leading on all the policy issues. As I say,
they also do an amazing job.
Yeah, and I'm about to say, she's just reminded me, they do an amazing job. The advocates, as I said before, the advocates in this sector are amazing, and they need to be, because the opportunities and challenges are also amazing, but Mental Health Australia also doing a great job. So I'm going to get off the stage now before I get kicked off.
That was a big rap, and undeserved in my case. Yes. Thank you. I wouldn't have done that. Okay, my name's Liz Ruck. I'm a policy officer at Mental Health Australia. We're the peak body for non-government mental health organisations in Australia. We used to be called Mental Health Council, but we thought that was too old-fashioned and boring, so we're now Mental Health Australia. We've actually been funded by the National Disability Agency, National Disability Insurance Agency, God, I can't believe I forgot their name, to provide support to the mental health sector to engage with the NDIS. And we've been doing that for about a year. We're just about to go on to do another year's worth of work. But we also see this as an opportunity to support the NDIA to actually get the NDIS right for people with mental illness, because we know there are a few challenges there. And we've heard some of them already. Now, no. What did you press, Chris? Sorry.
You can use that.
How dare you find it just there?
Who's got the clicker?
I've got it. It's not on? Oh, thank you. Sorry, that's really boring. Okay, so where are we at? Look, we love the NDIS for all the whinging we do about it. It's a great opportunity for people with mental illness. It actually acknowledges psychosocial disability, that disability that you can get as a result of mental illness. And it gives us, among the opportunities are, we can grow the community-managed mental health sector in a way that really needs to happen. But there are many unanswered questions. We've heard a few of them. We've had limited trial site experiences with people with mental illness and psychosocial disability being eligible, but we have some. But I don't think we can afford to wait for the NDIA's build-learn approach for those people to kind of fall in a hole before we get things right. I think there are some things that we need to do now, and I'm just going to go through a list of those. I think we've got some fundamental policy concerns and some major implementation challenges. And in the session before lunch, I don't know if any of you attended that, we heard from 3 service providers not necessarily providing supports to people with psychosocial disability, but some of them did. And they gave some really eloquent descriptions of the sorts of challenges that they're complex challenges that they're facing in implementing the NDIS. There are good news stories, but there are also some real challenges there. And what we've had to try and do at Mental Health Australia is kind of take those really beautiful descriptions and compress them down into tiny little sound bites in a list and hand them over to the NDIA and say, here, can you please deal with this? In reality, we don't. We try and work with them. But I feel like I'm diminishing some of the actual complexities that you guys experience every day when I describe some of this stuff. So please jump in if you feel that I haven't done it justice. First, I just want to go through a few key concepts I think it's important to talk about. Mental illness doesn't equal psychosocial disability. Not everyone with mental illness will get a psychosocial disability, but some people will. The thing about that is that we haven't generally funded supports for psychosocial disability outside the mental health system. Sure, people with psychosocial disability have got some supports from HAC services and some supports from disability services to varying levels depending on what state you're in. But as a general rule, and the best practice sorts of services we think are probably happening in our community managed mental health sector, which has really evolved under the health system. So it kind of creates problems when we've suddenly got this new disability system coming in and we want to try and work out, well, who's going to fund what? And I think that's got us into a few problems. We also have to remember that mental health services and disability support services are going to assist in recovery. You can't just have one or the other. So the NDIS isn't going to provide everything. They're going to provide some disability support services, but we're also going to have to grow our mental health support services. They're already not great. Our disability services have been sort of non-existent up until now, almost. We've got some, but not a lot. So we're really starting behind the 8 ball to get recovery supports. So we have to remember that we're not just talking about NDIS when we're talking about everything that someone with psychosocial disability needs. And I think the NDIS will be relieved to hear me say that. The NDIS is an insurance model and not a service system. So it's not going to provide a bunch of services. It's going to provide incentives for some services to grow, we hope. And we think it probably will, but it's going to take some time. But it's not going to be the kind of panacea that we would like it to be. And we're in transition with NDIS. They've started to talk about a learn-build approach, which is great. It's really good change from the beginning of the scheme when they basically came in really without any planning, let's be fair to them, and said, we're going to do it like this, and we're the experts, and you know, you will be told about how you're going to receive your choice and control. Now they've realised that they are really in an action research situation, and they're learning, and we're learning. And I think that's a great recognition to have. I just think that it's also really important when there are some major gaps in the system that we want to have that feedback loop where we tell them that something's going to go wrong. They have to have the capacity to listen to it and respond to that quickly. And I just don't think we've quite got there yet. And I think that's cause for some concern. So all the opportunities that we have means that there's lots of work to do, and I'm just going to summarise these issues in terms of policy and implementation issues. Excuse me, I'm very sneezy and it's springtime. Sorry about this. So the role of the NDIS versus other service systems. That's a piece of work, a conversation that we're really going to have, and it's going to be difficult. It's going to involve states and territories, it's going to involve the health services, and for mental health it's really going to involve health services, and it's going to involve the Department of Social Security, that's what they're called. And it's a bigger thing than the NDIA, than just the NDIS and the NDIA. But we really need to have that conversation to work out what are these health services that aren't going to be funded by the NDIS. And I know that other disability types are already having this problem, and people with psychosocial disability are already having this problem with planners on the ground. Planners don't really know, and it's not a simple decision to make. Something's a health service and something's a disability service. So I really think we need to get that right so that we can get the planners having a consistent approach on the ground. We've also thrown in money from our current disability services into the NDIS. I put respite here because we're at a respite conference, and I know that that's going to be all foremost on your mind. But we've also thrown in a significant amount of mental health money into the NDIS, and we've got no real way of tracking whether that gets spent on respite, if it was the respite money, or mental health, if it's the mental health money. It's gone into a big bucket. And when we see the NDIS already not being very good at providing support services to people with mental illness and already not being very good at providing respite services to carers, we're really worried about what's going to happen to that money. So I think we're really going to have a hard conversation about that as well, and we're certainly keeping that in mind when we're talking to the NDIA. Of course, there's the perennial conflict between the idea of a permanent impairment for people with psychosocial disability and recovery principles for people with psychosocial disability. The sector is kind of split on this. Some consumers and carers say we can't live with the idea of permanency of impairment. It's not strengths-based enough. It makes us sound too much like people with disabilities, which we're not. And yet they need the supports that the NDIS offers. Others say, well, let's try and define permanency of impairment. So we're in that space. We're actually trying to define it at the moment. If anyone's got any ideas, we'd love to hear them, because we're not getting very far. And I think it's something that some service systems have tried to do in the past and not been able to do very well. Watch this space. We also, designing Tier 2 is also going to be a huge policy challenge. We think that with only 60,000 people with mental illness being eligible, or thereabouts, being eligible for individually funded supports under Tier 3, we know that people with mental illness are going to be really most interested in Tier 2 services. It's going to have the biggest impact on people with psychosocial disabilities, so we're really interested in what's going to happen with that. It was interesting to hear Bruce this morning talking about the fact that there is a role for funded supports, role for block funding under Tier 2 of the NDIS. Did anyone else hear that? That's the first time I've heard them say that, and I think that was pretty amazing. Then I went away and thought, oh, maybe they didn't mean that they were going to fund them. Maybe they were just expecting someone else to fund them, but I don't know. Again, watch this space. Sorry? Yeah. So what can we do now? There are things that we can do straight away, implementation challenges, and these are the things that we're talking to NDIA about at the moment. We really want to maximise the input of carers and other trusted people. And again, they've got better at that. They've gone from not having service providers in the room to maybe having service providers in the room, to sometimes having service providers in the room. Similarly with carers, they're letting carers into the room now. But as we know in mental health, and everyone else probably knows in the disability space as well, it's a perennial issue when we're working with clinicians and mental health services. Getting them to keep carers in front of mind is really difficult. So we're really going to have to be working on that. We really need to get the assessment process right for people with psychosocial disability. We're not sure, well, we're pretty sure that it's not, they're using a tool that's not appropriate for people with psychosocial disability, but nobody really knows what that tool is. And we really want to pin NDIA down on that and have one that's appropriate for all disability types. We really want to involve non-government stakeholders in implementation and design of NDIA in the mental health space. When we do it well, we involve consumers and carers as partners in designing and delivering services. Well, we want to replicate that model in the NDIA. And I know the NDIA are starting to learn that that's important. Two recent reports, the Joint Senate Committee report where the Senate Committee went around and spoke to a whole lot of people with disabilities, and also a KPMG report that they commissioned themselves, have both said you really need to have the people that you're designing services for involved in the services in that process. And the NDIA themselves have undertaken to do that in their forward plan, but we haven't seen any detail of that yet, so we're going to keep on to them about that. And I think having people involved in that way would also stop stop some of these problems from happening in the first place. We want them to get better at that learn, build approach too. As I said, I think there are too many gaps in the system, and I haven't got time to go into them now, but you probably know where they are, to wait for people to fall into those gaps before the NDIA learns the lesson and decides to react to it. We don't want to have to wait until then, because some of those things could be really tragic. We also need to get better at describing and defining psychosocial disability services. Our community mental health services haven't done that very well in the past. They haven't had to. And they're difficult things to describe, like respite services, and I'm impressed to see the work that the Respite Association, sorry, I get your name wrong, have done around that. I think that's great, and I think we need to look to some of those models in doing some of our work, because the NDIS hasn't been able to articulate those services well in its structure, and that's partly because we haven't been able to describe them well. We've got to get better at that. Pricing. I get so depressed when I hear about this and hear about services struggling with this. I don't know, there seems to be, and some people seem to share it, an idea that there's fat in the not-for-profit sector that needs to be eradicated. Maybe some services do have some fat, accumulated funds. I don't know, they probably do. But I'm not sure that making the whole, I'm not sure the approach that they're using at the moment is the way to deal with that. I think services are really struggling with current pricing structures. I know it's the same in disability as it is in mental health. And yeah, again, it's an ongoing battle that we're not going to give up at this stage because it's too important. Things that are going to take longer to achieve are we really need the NDIA to get better skills in mental health and psychosocial disability. When I heard this morning someone recounting their experience where they'd been asked by an NDIA planner if Down syndrome was something that their child had had from birth, I thought, right, that's something that everyone faces, obviously. NDIA planners just have to get better at disability, really. But we know we're encountering that sort of stuff in the mental health space as well, and it's a real problem. And the NDIA have acknowledged that, and they reckon they're going to get better. So we're just going to have to help them. We also need the NDIA to be better at engaging with people who don't necessarily engage with systems currently, particularly in the mental health space. Either they aren't interested in talking about their mental illness, they don't think they've got a mental illness, or they don't really want to have anything to do with service systems. We've already got the beginning conversations in the mental health sector about the kind of balance between leaving those people to make their own decisions, and that's kind of fair enough, or leaving them to, sorry, and I keep losing the word, leaving them to, what's the opposite of flourish? Decline. Leave them to rot, basically, leave them to their own devices. Sure, that's somebody's choice, but offering them informed information about what might be useful and assisting to engage them in services can also be really useful, taking that proactive approach, and people can actually get a lot out of that and find that, oh no, maybe that wasn't the choice I wanted to make in the first place. We don't, I think it's beholden on us to being more proactive in that space, and I don't see the NDIA doing that at the moment, and I think that's going to be something we have to keep on to them about. Look, our project is going to go on for another year or two. We've got a whole program of things we're going to do, workshops with service providers, consumers and carers, a whole program. I make it sound huge. We'll probably do a little bit in each state and territory, and we'll try and pull some things together that all states and territories can use. We want to focus on supported decision making. We think it's, particularly in the mental health space, we think it's going to have a really big role in the NDIS, and we're going to be working with service providers and looking at that workforce development space. I'm reminded by Tina, who is on our project advisory committee, that we need to focus on workforce. So those are some of the things we're going to be doing, but I just wanted to let you know that we also have an online information hub for the project, and we have an e-newsletter on issues around mental illness and NDIS, and happy for you to subscribe. Really come and give me your email address, or you can go onto our website and subscribe. So that's just a bit of a plug for that. I'll leave that up. That's all.
Sorry, Tina. Where's the cursor? Can you see it?
Down the bottom
Yeah, no,
here.
I'm looking for the cursor.
Oh, you've lost the cursor.
There we go. Is that it?
I might go ahead and get started just while we're getting the PowerPoint up, just for the sake of time. When MHCC, which is the peak body for the non-government community managed mental health sector in New South Wales, and the new New South Wales Mental Health Commission became aware that the Hunter would be the trial site, we entered a partnership essentially to say, look, there's a lot of opportunities presenting here, and there's also going to be a lot of complexities, and we need to be in that space sooner rather than later. And that's sort of the background to why this project was established initially as a 6-year project, then 12 months. We've recently agreed to a further 12 months, and I'd actually anticipate the project going longer, but who knows the future. Oh, Liz, what button am I pressing to move? Oh, you did find the clicker. Okay. So, as you've been told already in this session, at full rollout, we'd anticipate about 57,000 Australians with psychosocial disability related to a mental health condition, a primary, if you will, mental health condition, to be accessing the scheme. There's the nature of the rollout. I think the most important part of this slide is that publication. This is a publication of the National Mental Health Consumer Carer Forum called Unravelling Psychosocial Disability. It was written in anticipation of the inclusion of mental health in the NDIS. I highly recommend it to you. It's my travel companion and has been for the last 16 months. The objectives that MHCC agreed to with the Mental Health Commission to explore the situation of mental health in the NDIS were very wide and very deep. And it included, for example, the physical health, mental health, physical health, substance misuse, mental health, intellectual disability. I'm hoping that ADDIC woman's still up there, but I'm blinded. Thank you. Interface. And yes, we do have a project between ADDIC and Hunter New England Mental Health about that space that's in the startup stages as we speak. So, look, I find myself getting quite lost in the learning that's occurring, and every time I do, I go back to that publication I just mentioned and remind myself of just how much further we've really got to go to better embed psychosocial disability in our understanding of a range of reform initiatives that are underway, not just the NDIS. The Hunter trial site involves 10,000 people in 3 LGAs, basically clustered around Newcastle, so it's really only a very, very small part of the Hunter New England local health district. My best estimates are that at full rollout, those 3 LGAs would represent about 1,300 people with psychosocial disabilities. At the end of year 1, we've got 159 people. So without some enormous advocacy and affirmative action, we've got a long, long way to go. You can probably tell I'm really whipping through these slides, so we've got some discussion time and to get us out of here. So, look, essentially in the first 3 months of the project and even beyond that, I went out and spoke with consumers, carers, NGOs, specialist mental health services, including Hunter New England Mental Health, ADDIC, the agency itself, along with the Commission, and talked to them about their experience. And there's a lot of complexities to that experience, but the theme that really came through was that, well, firstly, as has been noted, existing service providers, families and carers were being kept out of the room. Well, we managed to get the agency to acknowledge that at the 3-month mark and start to change that at the 3-month mark. But the theme that really, really came through for me was that lots of learning was occurring in silos for individual workers, programs, organisations and parts of the disability and mental health sectors, if you will. So this led to an interest by MHCC members in establishing a community of practice to accelerate the learning, increase opportunities, reduce barriers. I'm going to tell you more about the COP. I love the acronym for it in just a moment. But first I want to briefly delve into potentially how high impact NDIS implementation is in the mental health space. At the top of this slide, you see a raft of recent Commonwealth-funded mental health programs that have been established since 2006. The bulk of those are in scope, meaning they're an in-kind financial contribution to NDIS, which leaves a whole raft of questions about what will be left over for people that are not Tier 3 eligible. This is a national conference and I can't review the situation for every state, but we know that all ADIC services are transferring over to the scheme. We know that mental health psychosocial disability has traditionally been excluded from the ADIC brief and portfolio at the primary level. In fact, a lot of those 159 people are people that were existing ADIC clients that came out of the boarding houses 16 years ago, where everyone sort of did this to what was actually going on with their presentations. But some of the blinkers have come off that now, which is great. But the main reason I'm showing you this slide is that in New South Wales, there are no New South Wales health-funded mental health programs in scope for NDIS. Now, what that means is that people that aren't eligible for Tier 3 have something else to access. But I should probably also say New South Wales health underfunded mental health programs, because there's not many of them, and there's a review of those services underway. I'll come back to that theme. So the COP, we've had 5 meetings. As I said, it's about sharing our learning. At present, we get about 70 to 80 people at each meeting, so they're not small. At the end of September, 267 people had attended those forums over the 5 meetings, mostly community sector workers. And you might remember I said the first meeting was community sector specific, and in that meeting we said, do we want this closed? Do we want it open? And they said open, and that's why we've seen other people come in. One of the main issues that's come up across the first year of meetings, and Chris, I really thank you for your very generous and kind comments earlier, but we are really struggling to get effective consumer and carer representational structures in these meetings or in the other implementation structures that are hitting the ground in the Hunter, mostly across NDIA and government services. But that's shifting too as a result of the advocacy that's been undertaken. And by continuing, as you see in this slide, to hammer away at these themes in each and every forum and remind people that if we're not speaking to consumers, carers and communities, especially where participants have complex and diverse health and social needs, we will get it wrong. History has told us that we will get it wrong. Family and carer issues. Look, the guidelines have been spoken about all day. Jonathan mentioned Carers New South Wales issues paper. ARAFME Australia also put out a position statement in the last little while. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it to you. Big focus on the importance of shared and supported decision making in negotiating differences, especially that may exist between people with mental health conditions and their families because of, I hate this phrase, the lack of insight that some people with mental health conditions can exhibit sometimes, often, maybe. For some, anyway. Yeah, and again, I'll just note, we're lucky in New South Wales because no health-funded mental health programs are under the scheme, but that could change. As Jonathan noted, we have a pretty well-structured New South Wales Health, Family and Carer Support Program that's really new, like 2008, I think. But, you know, it's working well, and that could change because these agreements about what's in and what's out get reviewed from time to time. And in fact, if New South Wales is at this end of the continuum where none of our mental health funded programs are in scope, Victoria, where the bulk of the other Year 1 mental health related works occurred, is at the other end. Anyone here from Victoria working in the mental health space? Yeah, okay, not too many. So essentially the situation down there, I did see 2 hands go up. Essentially the situation down there is every single state health funded mental health program is in scope, is a financial contribution. So imagine that. If you're not Tier 3, there's nothing else there for you, allegedly. And this is the sort of challenge where the alliance with Mental Health Australia across the states and territories, as more trial sites come online, is so incredibly important. Respite issues, yeah, look, not provided by NDIS. Again, I'm not going to elaborate. We've had a whole discussion all day about this, and you will also tomorrow. I've learned a lot today about what that future space might look like, and I thank you for the opportunity to present and be here, because I've got to tell you, the 15 months I've been working on the ground in the Hunter, a couple of days a week, I probably learnt more in here today about what that future lay of the land might be than I have in those entire 15 months, which I think is pretty frightening. In particular, in regard to the National Mental Health Respite Carer and Support Program, which is 50% in scope. In the Hunter, that only got established for the first time in December. So, you know, they've sort of not sure who they are yet, let alone what their interface with the NDIS is. And the same can be said for Partners in Recovery, where, in fact, New South Wales has been the only trial site with both a Partners in Recovery initiative and NDIS trial in Year 1 anywhere. So they've been very alone in writing the rules on what that space is going to look like. That's a whole nother presentation. I just want to mention also that VicServe did a project on behalf of CMHA looking at the mental health respite space, and doesn't get talked about a lot because it went a bit out underground, but there is information out there about it, and all of the findings were in support of flexible approaches to mental health respite, consistent with the more innovative stuff that you've spoken about today, but possibly even more flexible because of the flexible nature of mental health presentations, and especially as it relates to consortia-based approaches to close gaps where there may not be enough respite services. This is my last slide, except for my contacts. MHCC does a view from the Peak Quarterly e-newsletter. You can get that on our website. ARAFMI New South Wales collaborated with their Hunter branch to write an article on the experiences of families and carers over the first year of the NDIS in the Hunter. And it was really interesting to me, that article, because although the families and carers were concerned about themselves and their needs for support, what they were even more concerned about is the challenges that their loved ones were having in accessing the scheme, in regard to them having been quite alienated and traumatised around their lived experience of acquiring and living with a mental illness and contact with mental health services sometimes, and just not feeling safe approaching bureaucratic systems. And I commend that article to you, and thank you, ARAFMI, for it. Look, I just want to remind us that NDIS can't be everything to everyone. It's one aspect of a larger national workforce strategy, and that really important reform to meet the aspirations of the United Nations conventions is also occurring in parallel with not just aged care reform, but some pretty monumental reform of our mental health sector that's being undertaken also through COAG and the National Mental Health Commission in the form of their efficiency and effectiveness review of mental health services. Yeah, maybe it needs to be done, but go figure. So I think we need to keep that broader policy framework in mind when thinking about the mental health space in NDIS space, both for people with mental illness and people with all other disabilities that have mental health problems. That's my presentation. There's my contact details. Thank you.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Liz. A lot of really dense, rich information. I think time for 2 questions. Anyone got a question they want to ask either Tina about Hunter or Liz nationally? No? You got enough from that? Yeah, I know. It's been a long session. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Liz and Tina.